Okay, could we not buy things from China? I read an editorial by Andrew Bolt in the Herald Sun this morning, and he says, well, we shouldn't give money to this repressive regime, especially because it's trying to harm Australia's economic interests. And he has a point, but the problem is that it is very difficult not to buy things made in China because China sort of has become the world's factory over the past 3 decades. I mentioned the iPhone. You know, it's, I think, probably the still single most popular type of smartphone. Now, Apple, which owns or makes iPhones, is of course an American company, but all of its iPhone factories are located in China. So if you didn't buy anything made in China, you couldn't buy a new iPhone. Our next guest is co-founder and director of How to Buy Australian Made, Steve Eagle. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Do you think it's possible for the average punter who might buy things for the garden down at Bunnings and buy clothes and toys for the kids at Kmart to completely avoid Chinese-made products?
I think it is possible for that shift to start. If you're looking for a 100% direct swap Australian-made to imported goods, at the moment that would be a challenge. The Australian manufacturing sector has been in decline up until 2020, and interestingly in 2020 we've seen a reverse of that. There's been a lot of support from the government and also from the business sector this year. And interestingly, it's been driven by online consumer behaviour. So lots of people looking for Australian goods, which in turn then supports Australian manufacturing. I think if you're looking for a direct swap from Chinese product to another country of origin, that's really got to happen at big industry. Most of the stuff that Australia imports from China is supplying equipment and materials to industry. Consumer goods are a layer below that, but absolutely being supported in 2020.
So when you talk about, equipment to industry, what sort of things are we talking about? Like diggers and stuff like that?
Yeah, exactly. So the list of Australia's sort of top imports looks like petroleum products, then car accessories and components, crude oil, phone systems and devices. So that's the smartphones that we were talking about before. Delivery trucks, computers, pharmaceutical goods, gold, interestingly enough, and then medical equipment as well. So not much of that is consumer-related stuff. Maybe the smartphone sector there is. Of those imports, about 24% of them are currently imported from China, and that's around about $47 billion worth of economic activity.
Okay, so it's a lot of money. Now, I mean, for all those sorts of things, are there alternatives? I know, for example, with computers, Taiwan makes lots of computers. That's, as yet, still not part of the People's Republic of China. Are there actually alternatives?
Yeah, there absolutely are, and it's really exciting to see the movements that the government's been making this year, and it's kind of happened, behind the screen, if you like. Australia has signed more free trade agreements in 2020 than any other year in our history, and just in the last couple of weeks we signed on to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or the RCEP, which is involving 15 countries and, interestingly, also including China. That totally covers 30% of the global economy. Now, what that does for Australia is give us a seat at a table where the conversation is going to be a lot more level, right? It's no longer a small country like Australia up against a big one like China. It's now 14 countries and plus China making 15, having a discussion around how can more fair trade take place.
So, I mean, if that all gets signed up and everything, would it be illegal for China to just suddenly impose, tariffs on our wine, for example?
Yeah, it's interesting, and the legality of that is already under question outside of the RCEP. So the RCEP is now already signed, so that deal is done. It's now moving into implementation. Interestingly, the legality of of what China is doing in terms of tariffs on the wine industry and these other sectors you talk about, that's managed by the World Trade Organization. So China is a signatory to the World Trade Organization, as is Australia, and many other countries are. And it'll be under their, law and their conditions that discussion's had.
Now, one of the reasons, of course, we import so much, I mean, if we do look at the consumer end and the industrial end, but one of the reasons we import so much stuff from China is that, by and large, it's cheap and with varying levels of quality, but a lot of it is well made. Now, I mean, you know, if we went to make a lot of these things back in Australia, it would cost a lot more, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's actually been studied. So the Centre of Future Work, under the Australian Institute earlier this year looked at that exact question. You know, is it really true that a high labour cost country like Australia is not competitive if you look at other markets like Thailand or Taiwan or China as a competitor? And what they discovered was that it's only about 13% of a product cost that actually is influenced by that labour component. So while Australia does have a higher labour requirement, it's actually a small percentage of the total product cost. Now, interestingly, Australian consumers have also been studied in this year, and the Nielsen Institute of Research did a consumer survey where they found that Australian consumers were happy to spend 13 to 18% more if they knew that their products were made in Australia. So the data exists that consumers are happy to do that. I think it's access to that product and access to that manufacturing that's the real question.
And then you got to get into things like, you know, appropriate signage and labelling and all that, so that people actually have the information in front of them to make the decision that's appropriate for them.
Yes, exactly. So the Made in Australia campaign, who manages the classic sort of green triangle with the golden kangaroo, that logo, they've been diversifying their logo over the years to accommodate for different ways that Australian consumers buy goods. Not every product is 100% Australian made. Quite a lot of them have some components that are imported. So better labelling, transparency is helping consumers understand that. Now, if each household in Australia transitioned their spending habits and spent $50 per week on locally made Australian products instead of their imported equivalent, that activity alone would inject $30 billion into the Australian economy annually. If each individual did a similar behaviour, each individual made a one-off purchase of $100 of an Australian-made goods, that alone would support 3,000 jobs every year.
Sure.
So there's a significant impact that can be made just by Australian consumers and Australian small businesses, the micro vendors, Amazon sellers, Shopify store owners, these kind of guys, by buying and selling Australian-made goods. So that's a really healthy thing for us to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. All right, I really appreciate your time. Steve Eagle there, co-founder and director of How to Buy Australian Made. Which, you know, if we're not going to buy things in China, yeah, we could buy stuff from other countries. But if we really could make an effort to buy things locally, that would make a massive difference to our economy. And isn't that interesting? All you got to do, if each of us spends $100 a year on a local product that we would have otherwise spent on an imported one, you know, thousands of jobs get created.